For everyone, thank you for coming to listen to me. Do we have to click? Why this title? Because Jesus was not in my life for a long time. He was a stranger, almost quote-unquote forbidden figure in my house. But you know, you're a child, you don't discuss about this, you accept. But of course, I'm not a child anymore. So I start to think about what was it at that time? What happened? Why was like this? So shall I just press back and down, right?
Or right and left.
Let me see. Okay. So I was raised in a Buddhist house, and especially by my grandparents. If it was not for my grandparents, probably I would be very quickly absorbed by the Catholicism. That was the main, really, almost 100% of the people would follow the Catholicism in Brazil. And many decades ago, that was very reinforced in many houses with this symbol of Christ in a cross in almost all houses. It's not only in the church that you were kind of, there was this ritualistic demand to go and follow the rituals, but in all households we had this cross. And then as you grow, then the TV comes or whatever, what they show to us, the wars, the Jesus' crucifixion, the suffering through the Calvary, the Golgotha. So all very painful images. And then I wondered why my grandfather, especially my grandfather, didn't want me as the oldest child in his house. I was very special because the grandchild born in his house is a special grandchild. He had other grandchildren older than me, but I was raised in his house because my father was the only son. The other ones were daughters. And then in the school, there was this gospel, or how to say, you teach gospel at home, at the school. But I had to get out from the class while they were, because my grandfather didn't want me to follow the teachings. So I went now to the internet, of course, to see why he was so averse or so fearful of the Catholicism being absorbed by us. He was a very Buddhist person. He used to go to the temple in São Paulo City. He used to follow, to help everyone there. He was very much involved. So in the short time, 10 years that he stays with us, then he deceased, it was sufficient to imprint something. Well, Jesus is not a allowed figure in my house. And the other people, they didn't care. But because I was going to this school, I had to face this kind of ambiguity, you know, what is this, what is that? So I went to the internet, and I saw that with the great navigation in 1500, at the same time that they went to conquer the New World, the Portuguese, especially the Portuguese, and then later the Spanish, they divide the Tordesillas line to decide that the Spanish would colonize the east side was the Portuguese. So Brazil was colonized first by the Portuguese, and then we extend our territory to the west. But the reason they wanted to go there is to conquer lands and to convert the native ones there, the native Brazilians or the ones that were there. So they want to convert those that didn't have religion. If they have religion, they want to change the religion. So the Jesuits came together with this discovery. At the same time, they went through, because they want the goodies from India, from the east side. So the navigation went to their side, and by mistake, they say they hit the Brazil. But it was not a wanted discovery, but it's just that what they say. So how they went to Japan. So they entered Japan from this South Island, Kyushu. There was mostly a feudal, system. They were always in wars. Japan was always in war. They want more land because, tiny island, so they want to conquer. So they were constantly in wars. So the Portuguese ships, and they put the Jesuit there always. They want to sell some war items, and they have to not to deal with the emperor, but they have to deal with the ones that were the landlord, the daimyos or the shoguns. They have to make a deal with them. So Buddhism was really the religion there. But you know how Buddhist is. War, no. So when the war was not a good thing, so the daimyos and the shogun, they decide to ban the Buddhists. So in that vacuum, the Catholicism entered. But then they didn't want the Catholicism there, so they banned the Catholicism many times. They allow back, then they ban, they allow back, then that was going on and off until very end of 1800s, where my grandfather was born. So I could see that they were in this turmoil by being almost invaded. They invaded by these Portuguese ships that's coming, or from the north, they fear the Russians. I remember my grandmother had been fearful of the Russians invading, and then I see how close it is to the Russian territory. So when they went to Brazil in 20 years later, in beginning of 1900, see this country all Catholic and imposing the Catholicism, I could understand that he didn't want that. So that's how I think this story. So we never pronounced the name Jesus. Jesus was that terrible image, and of course he took advantage. He took advantage of this image that for a child was so painful to see, in a bloody, and also the scenery of the Jesus suffering. So they reinforced this fear through this image that were used normally in other households, but not, if you want to ban Catholicism, you use those things, negative aspects. Okay. So the Spiritism came, actually, is the only doctrine, as far as I know, that tries to get this Jesus, this symbolical religious symbols out, and try to redeem, to rescue this image of Jesus as an educator that came to show us the God, how merciful God is, what is the way to God, and what we're supposed to be to earn the eternal life. So Spiritist says in the question 625, when the spirits ask what is the most perfect type that God has offered to man as his guiding model, they say it's Jesus. So to be a guide, we have to admit, well, he knows the way, right? You cannot be a guide if you don't know the way, if you didn't experience the way to God. So Spiritists say that he is the governor of the earth, planet Earth. So planet Earth is 5 billion years. So by the time he designed with the best, how to say, scientists of all different areas to build the planet Earth, from the geology to all the species, how to get, the animal kingdom, everything. If at that time he was already a pure spirit, imagine how long he experienced our stage now when he was not that pure. So he probably was billions of years ago. So what I think is the following. If he was such an enlightened being, so his being would spread almost the size, I would say, the galaxy. How could he shrink to be born in the planet Earth? It must be some long preparation for that, because it shouldn't be easier to come back in this planet Earth. That is one thing that strikes me, how much of willingness and preparation to show us he had to have in order to do this kind of transformation. The other thing that strikes me is because as an advisor in the university, we have students, right? We usually do the interview, Daniel knows it, to get the best of the students. You have to get the best of the students because they're more prepared, because we have a project, and we have to be sure that student will fulfill. We'll take that project to the end, publish some papers, etc. And I see Jesus there choosing the simplest one and the most unprepared people to help him to really establish his ministry. I said, oh my God, I'm far from him, really. I am really far. So he really went to like Simon Peter, Andrew, John, James. They were all fishermen. They were all poor, simple people. Some didn't even know how to read or write, perhaps except for Levi or Matthew, that was the tax collector. The rest, they didn't know even. But this was not something strange. 90% or more of the people in the planet Earth, they didn't know how to read or how to write. So I just wonder, how could he have this courage to go after such a simple people and decide that he would succeed, That's how far we are, how far I am. The other thing is also this strikes me here. If you see this image, he is in an open area. I need this microphone for her to hear me, most likely. Now imagine staying in this open area with 100 200 or more people, millions sometimes, there, how could his voice be taken that far? Because there is no microphone, there is nothing, no aids. How could he project his voice? You know, because everything had to be passed vocally. There is no camera, no writing thing, nothing. People has to hear in order to keep in the memory. Of course, he repeated over again the same thing. That was the way to teach. But his voice must be something, I don't know, out of this world, really. Okay, so I start to think, what is the method that Jesus used to teach during his ministry? Because as a teacher, I want to know how can I be successful for the 100th student to listen what I'm saying. You know, it's not easy. So they say Jesus taught with authority, not with fear, not that but with people sense he knew what he was talking about. Adaptability to the type of hearing. So he would scan and see, well, those are very simple fishermen. I have to talk their language. These are the Pharisees, the high-level doctors of the law. It's another language. If I talk to the women, it's another example that I have to give. So he adapts all his language to each audience and give the examples accordingly. He used the rhetoric, which is the dialogue method. Sometimes he would put questions, sometimes he would listen, sometimes he would be quiet, but it's always some kind of dialogue, always, to stick to the mind of the person. Look, oh, he asked that question. So that sticks much more than he just preaching here. If I ask a question here, would be better to stick to your mind. Repetition. There is no tape recorder, so he has to repeat the story many times with a little bit of change in the version because of the audience. So when sometimes the New Testament, you have a little deviation in the same story, it's not that the one that copied or the one that is reported made his own change. No, it's because he talked with a little thing change to a different audience. So instead say, they said, or something more. Illustration. He used a lot of illustration, like in this example, the log and the speck in the eyes. You know, you that have the log in your eyes don't see only the speck in the other people's eyes. You know, he uses this thing, you know, that for the simple people to get that in their memory. Parables, parabolic forms. He used a lot of parabolic that would be adapted to that given problem that appeared in front of him. You're going to see that. Allusions to Old Testament. We think he did not care about the Old Testament. It is all about Old Testament because he was following the Mosaic law. He was a Jewish. And he said clearly, I did not come to change the law. He only came with new things, how to love. Now it's other times, 1,000 years later, he wants love to be the motive to follow the Mosaic law to God. And impact. He uses the impact. He wants to make an impact on you by confronting pain and relief. in order for us to sense the mistake or what route we should follow. So the impact is the name. Why the impact is the thing? We all know, if I ask you, what is the date or the event that you remember most? Wonderful event, joyful event. A mother will say, well, the first time I got my child, my baby in my chest, probably. I know the details. I can tell you the details. Or the day that I receive a horrible news about a disease of my child. So it's an impacting event. And the neuroscience knows that in order for us to consolidate the memory, it needs to be something so emotional that it goes back and forth in our mind until that thing gets there in our skin almost. So this is a way that we all know it works. So the aims, Jesus' aims during the 3 years means only 3 years. Imagine, I need 30 years to pass a message. 3 years. So I collect, of course, I'm not going to talk about all this because I told Daniel we have to have many discussions, many days. For example, he wants to exemplify God's love. We didn't know that time about God's love. We think God was a human love. The way we have some interest, so we love a couple of people, but not outside of that. So he wanted to exemplify, and this is God's love to all, even those that commit mistakes, error. They're always loved. So in the parable of the prodigal son, that is the parable that he shows. No matter what that son did, he wasted all the goods that he received, which can be make analogy with our health, our body, all these things that we have for granted, and then we spoil, we waste. But even that, we're not going to be subject to eternal punishment. As a guide, he directs to the kingdom of God, that he says kingdom of God is what we built, is God built inside of us. It's us, God's work inside of each heart. So you can see how all through the transformation of these people, Mary Magdalene, Peter, post-transformation. And to the eternal life, when the doctor of the law asks, who is my neighbor that I'm supposed to love? And then he says the parable of the Good Samaritan. And he chose the Samaritan that the Jewish hated, and vice versa. They thought the Samaritan was the worst of the worst. Nobody's good in Samaria. And then he chooses exactly the Samaritan to be the good one. So to shock the disciples, because a little bit before in that trip, they passed through the Samaria and they asked for shelter. And they did not give it to them, the shelter, water, whatever. And that was a big almost crime in that time, if you don't give shelter to the ones, pilgrims that were walking. Even that, when a couple of hours later, one day later, he gives an example of a good Samaritan. So the disciple that want to burn all the Samaritans, they say, what is going on with him? What is good in Samaritans? But he gives the example of a good Samaritan. And as a model, he shows how also to build our faith in the divine forces. So the faith, in the end, all his first disciples had such a faith that he could heal all the sick people like Jesus did, because their faith increase was so focused by the love that they built inside of them. He also teach how to accept the quote-unquote sinners. There was no sinners for Jesus or in the eyes of God. The people that temporarily is making mistake or was caught by the circumstance. So he says, well, if you are condemned, Mary Magdalene, why you never ask, what happened to her life? Who actually dragged her to this type of life? Isn't you? You? Nobody asked that. It's only condemned her. So the woman caught in adultery, that he says that they want to stone the adulterous woman, we think, well, he was teaching about hypocrisy of the men that were there trying to stone. No, it's a lesson of acceptance. Because all of those that want to stone the woman, and slowly they went back, what they are admitting? They are admitting, I also have a sin. And Jesus said, you are accepted. Don't sin anymore. But, you know, I'm not going to condemn. So he did not condemn even the other people that were there. So his acceptance, Mary Magdalene, Zacchaeus, a story that we know. And he advocates for the sick, weak, unfortunate, always, because they were so damaged in that system. So they had to, he was there always trying to heal them, giving comfort, hope, etc. And the Sermon on the Mount is the poem that really advocates and is for these people, and offering the kingdom of God, all the goodness that will come for them in particular, not for the good ones, not for the healthy ones, not for the rich ones. He promotes, that part I like, women's equality. Oh my God, inclusiveness. In that region, Eastern culture, women was like an item, really an item. The owner, the man, either the father, when she was single, or the husband. The women could not get out from home without the company of a man that did not belong to her family, either father, brother, like uncle. They could not. And they didn't have any voice, no voice in the society. They only bear children, even the education, they have nothing to say about the education of the kids, nothing. So he goes there, and in that event of Mary and Martha, that Martha wants to keep doing the women thing in the kitchen, and Mary comes to listen to Jesus, and Martha complains, Jesus, why don't you tell her to help me in the kitchen? And she says, Martha, Martha, Mary is getting the best part. You should do the same, which is to instruct yourself, educate yourself, to learn, to read, etc. You know. And inclusiveness. And he denounced the hypocrisy of the Pharisees. So there was a lot of no. For instance, you cannot work on Saturday. And he healed a woman in the temple where only the man was allowed to enter in the front. And he called this woman to the front, which is already something not heard about, and heal her on a Saturday. So imagine why he was crucified as a revolutionary. He had to, because he was all turned down all the law that were established by the doctors of the law. Okay, so the Spirit's book summarized very well what it means to be charitable according to Jesus. So, according to all his teaching of acceptance, of forgiveness, of don't make more mistakes, there is always love in the kingdom of God, eternal love for everyone. So he's summarizing these 3 items. Benevolence for everyone. That's what he preached. No matter if it's a sinner, sick, leper, whatever. Indulgence for the imperfection. Never judge too quickly people. Because you also have perhaps hidden or other type of imperfections, but you have it. And forgiveness of injuries. You always have to start from our part the forgiveness, because without that we cannot move on. We stay, the other 2 cannot be put in place if we don't forgive. If I don't forgive, I cannot be benevolent to everyone. That's cut, because I won't be benevolent for the one that I don't want to pardon. I will be always criticizing that one that I don't want to forgive, thinking, well, I'm right, he's wrong. So the third part is very, very, very important that we practice. It's a practice. It's very difficult in the beginning, I know that. But in the beginning you have that impulse, and then you say, let me think about it. Let me, and then you start to think, well, why he did that? Why she did that? I didn't walk in his shoes or her shoes to know why was that. Only if I did so, if I don't walk in his shoes, or like the Japanese say, if you eat a big bag of rice together, or the other one say 1 kilo of salt together, we may start to understand the reasons, the story of that person. Before that, no. So this is the beautiful poem on the Beatitudes, which I think was Gandhi said. If everything disappears in the surface of the planet, all the religions, all the teachings, but the Sermon on the Mount is preserved, is enough for us to be a good person and to reach the kingdom, or to construct the kingdom of God inside of us. Okay. Because of the day, special day today, I think we should talk about these last events of this 3 years ministry, which was the Jesus jailing, crucifixion, and resurrections. This is the most indelible series of events imprinted in the heart and the souls of Jesus' first disciples and followers, and thereby enduring the preservation of his teachings and the propagation of Christianity throughout the planet. Without these events, I am almost certain that Christianity won't survive, won't have survived, won't have this. We're gonna see how the people that were important in this propagation, they were touched by this part of Jesus' life. Okay, in this book, Paul and Stephen, I think many of the Spiritists have read this book. We are studying on Sundays, right? We are already here. Just to show you that the coming of Jesus was already predicted in very detail. In this book, Stephen, that his Hebrew name was Jeziel, and his sister Abigail, they were raised in the Mosaic doctrine teachings. But they were very special spirits, very spiritualized. And Jeziel and Abigail and his father were jailed because his father, out of a bad decision, because in Corinth, they were slaved. The Jewish were slaved by the Greek, by the Romans mostly. And they decide to get their property. And he reacted against this and burned the neighbor farm that belonged to this Roman proconsul, for revenge. In the process, he almost killed his son, Jeziel, but they were all jailed because Jeziel decided to say that it was me that put fire, not my father. But then they knew that was his father. So this conversation happens between the two brothers, the brother and the sister, in the jail. And he says, because she was saying, why this thing is happening to us? There must be a reason why it's happening to us, to our people, over and over again. And he says, but I believe in the Redeemer Messiah, who will come to shed his light on all things. The prophets have stated that men will not understand him. Nonetheless, he will come to teach love, charity, justice, and forgiveness. He will be born amongst the humble. He will set an example amidst the poor. He will enlighten the people of Israel. This was in Corinth. So he's talking about this Messiah coming to Israel. He will lift up the sad and oppressed, and he will lovingly receive all who suffer in the abandonment of their hearts. Who knows, Abigail? He might already be in the world and we don't even know it. God works in silence and doesn't compete with human vanity. We have our faith and our trust, and our trust in heaven is a source of inexhaustible power. The children of our people have suffered a great deal, but only God knows why. He would not send us problems that we did not need it. So Jeziel read all the prophets of the Old Testament, especially Isaiah, which he predicted the coming of the Messiah. So he knew all of this from the Old Testament. And there were like many people from that time waiting for this Messiah because the prophets predicted. So you see, it happened exactly what happened to Jesus. Exactly what happened to Jesus was predicted, 300, 400, 600 years before. Just to see that he knew what would happen, and nevertheless he came, Jesus came. So in the last time, before that last Easter, he enters in triumphant to Jerusalem, but he already had expressed that something will happen to me. That will be my last supper with you. And someone will betray me. And everybody said, who, me? No, me, no. But he knew that this was just artificial reception. There was no value of that. And he wanted to come in a donkey, so to show he didn't want to put his feet in the tapestry or whatever that they were putting there for him, because he thought that was not. So what happened to this trial and the final decision to the disciples? Look, you stay with the person, with this special person, the Messiah, for 3 years constantly, these 12 disciples. They see Jesus doing something amazing, transforming water in wine, healing the lepers, returning the sight to the blind, stopping the storm, the wind and the storm. And they see this and say, they were certain that he would show his power to the, not only to the priests, but to the Roman Empire authority. And then he would build the kingdom of God. That was their expectation, the disciples. So for what he showed his power, if it's not to use in his favor in the most needed circumstance? Why did he do that? So they were completely astonished by the series of events and final condemnation by Pontius Pilate and by the high hierarchy of the priests. The Romans actually didn't care. Because for them, everybody was a slave. It's not only the Jewish. Everybody that was not Roman, it was a slave. But they were it was, useful to be at the side of the priest. It was convenient. So they said, well, because once they're okay with them, they take care of the others. So they kind of wash their hands and let the high priest, Herodes, whatever, to condemn Jesus to the cross. And this image shows, first, in one hand, how this was common, to crucify people. It was something that was common. You are a thief, you go there and you crucify. That was the method. But you could see that although some people that were there has nothing to do with this, they were there in a mission, either the Romans, or the priests, just to condemn, except for few people that were Jesus' followers. His mother, especially the women. All the women were there. All the Marys were there. Many Marys were there. and John the Evangelist. The only male disciple that was there was John, the youngest one, the one that was 16 years old. He was the one there holding, supporting Jesus' mother. The rest, Peter, the rock, that was supposed to be the number one of his group, negate him in the last minute. No, I don't know him. No, I never saw him. No. You saying you saw him? No. So he negates 3 times that Jesus said to him, don't come to me. Oh, Jesus, don't. Why you say some of us will betray you? Never. He said, oh, look, be careful because you're going to negate me 3 times before the how to say that bird, the rooster. Yes, how you say? Crows. Okay. And then, imagine now, you are this dear disciple. You're there 24/7 with this master. And in the 3rd time he negates, his eyes locked to Jesus' eyes. It's like Jesus saying, didn't I tell you? That pain was so imprinted in his soul because his master knew he would do that. So after this event, all the disciples were in such a depressive situation. They didn't know what to do. They were shocked. They didn't know what to do with these events, how they could rationalize this, what happened. They could not do that. So in the resurrections, the many resurrections were kind of balm, a relief for that wound that were so open on their heart. For them to say, oh my God, he's alive. So that was so impacting because they had suffered so much. They were in such a suffering mode that the news in the 3rd day by Mary Magdalene, that was a woman, that was the first to see Jesus, and he commanded her to go back and tell the men, the other disciples, what happened. Well, the words of a woman, there was no value, but he asked her to go there and say, imagine. So he went, of course, the male disciple did not believe it, but Mary Nazareth said, I believe in her. And they went there. So Jesus had to appear to many men group in order to say, look, this is real. What I told you is real. So in this happens like 1 or 2 days after, they were still talking about the events, some in a good way, saying, oh my God, that master, everything that he did, the love, all the events they want to repeat. They want to repeat in order to heal their wounds. And these 2 men were talking, and then another person comes from behind and say, what are you talking about? And say, oh, you don't know what happened to our master, Jesus. I said, no. And they start to say how wonderful he was and what's going on, what happened. He started to console these 2 people. You know, apparently he knew a lot about scriptures, whatever. And when they arrived in Emmaus, which is like 5 to 7 miles from Jerusalem, very short, he said, why don't you stay with us? We're feeling so good now after we talk to you. Why don't you stay? And he stayed. And the time he cut the bread, they recognized Jesus there. So they said, oh my God, we have to go back right away to Jerusalem to tell the people what happened. That is true. He is alive. So they went to talk to the other. Now it's the male talking to the male. Sorry for the male, but Mary Magdalene didn't. And he promised that he came back to small groups of the disciples. One of them, Thomas, was not present, and then Thomas said, if I don't see, I don't believe. Then he had to come back again when Thomas was present, they see, etc. Now you believe. And he said, well, if me that you saw, you don't believe. Imagine God that you never saw. How are you going to have a faith? Believe, So what happened to these disciples? They were all in Jerusalem South, right? All the ministry, the good part of Jesus' life happened in the Sea of Galilee, way north, like 60 miles, whatever, north. So they had the desire. They have to go back. They said, we have to go back to Capernaum, to Magdala, see that sea again. Try to connect with Jesus. Remember what he was with us. All the fishing, everything. We have to go. So they all went back to there because they had come for the Easter celebration. So now they went back. And there each one start to talk because each one had already a story in there stick to their mind because they heard about these stories of Jesus so many times. That's the way to memorize. So each one start to talk what they knew, what said, and the emotion start to rise. The emotion, longing for him start to rise. And in the end, everybody, that atmosphere of longing, love was all there in this scenario where many times Jesus was there with them. And that afternoon, in the end of the day, they say it's a beautiful sunset. For some reason, there are mediums, right? So many mediums there. They knew something fantastic would happen in that afternoon. So people start to gather. Something's going to happen today. So 500 people gathered there in that place, in that afternoon. And there he appeared for the last time. He appeared later, a small group, but it was a big, big deal. And there he gave the instruction that all these followers were the yeast that should make the cake grow. And he reminded them that everything that he taught was true, that he was there as a proof, and they have to do the same and teach the others. Say their example, spread the teachings. So after that, all the people, the fishermen, Peter, all the other disciples, they said, we have to go back to Jerusalem. So Peter came with all his family, Mary Nazareth, all these people came and he found, with the help of many wealthy people, the first institution for charity, which is the House of the Way, which was there to treat and receive everyone in need, sick, poor, lonely. Every people that was in need, it could appear in that house in Jerusalem. It's the House of the Way. And Stephen, in another, before that, he appeared to Simon Peter. Simon Peter was the head of this institution. And one day he was so tired because so many came. Many would appear in that house. And he was so tired and depressed. He closed the door and said, no more people today. And then someone entered. And he said, who are you? The door was closed. How did you enter here? Of course, he didn't need to have. And then he recognized the presence of Jesus, and because he was weeping, how tired he was of this work. It was too much for him. And then he said, I just told you to take care of my, how to say, the shepherd takes care of the sheep. Just that. Just do that, the flock. Just do that. Don't go to desperation. We are all here to help you. Just keep doing. So it was a big relief. And this also appeared to Mary Nestle in the last days of her life, when she died at 80 years old. He was the one that almost carried her while she was still conscious in Ephesus, in Turkey. Okay, but I want to talk, to finalize with the most important, in my opinion, the resurrection of Jesus, appearance of Jesus, is the appearance of Jesus to Saul, which later he became Paul, Saul of Tarsus. That appearance was enough to convert this very stubborn, male, macho, strong, impulsive person. He was not a soft guy. He was very determined. And he was the one that prosecuted and stoned the first martyr of the Christianity, which is Jezreel or Stephen. In front, he didn't know, in front of his fiancée, that was Abigail. He got in love with Abigail. Imagine how God twists all the pieces. So he is in love with Abigail, this soft, wonderful girl. He didn't know that the brother that she asked him to try to find, and she used to say Jezreel, but he only knew about Stephen, because when he met was Stephen, already changed the name. And he invited, because that time was custom. You're gonna kill 100, or you invite as a best guest to be in the front row. It was something good, a prestige. So he invited her to see this stoning of a Christian follower. And he said, I don't like this thing, but come, so I'm gonna see. When she came, he was almost already dead. And Paul ordered, twisted all the mind of the high priest, and made them to condemn him. So Stephen was stoned by the order of Paul, Saul. And Abigail said, but this is my brother. And he said, how come he's your brother? He said, it's Jezreel. So Jezreel dies in her arms. Even that, Abigail did not hold any bad feelings to Paul, but to Saul. But Saul was offended. How come I am engaged with a person whose brother is a Christian? Imagine how much of pride he had in his mind, And then he disengaged to her. And then he learned that when he decided to come back, looking for her, they learned that she was very sick. She's very sick. And he went there and he learned that she was converted to Christianity, imagine. Now one more. And then he says, "Who did this to you?" No, she didn't say who did. But she practically died saying, this wonderful Messiah, wonderful Nazareth carpenter that he hated most, saved and consoled her in the last days of her life. So Paul was upset. He wanted to kill all the Christians, especially the one that converted her. So he got one of the Christians and, he tormented the guy, but no, physically tortured for him to give the name and where he was. He says it was as Ananias, but he's old, where he did. So he had to say that he went to Syria because in Jerusalem was too much. This person called Saul of Tarsus is coming all after the Christians. So he had to Syria. So he asked for for the Sanhedrin, this temple, this court, to give his special grant for him to go there and get Ananias. So he got 2 guys to go with him, and he was heading to Damascus. Look, Jerusalem to Damascus, I think, what is this? By horse in this terrain, I don't know, 80 miles, 100 miles, whatever it is, hot, desert, rocky, bad. But let me get this back. But we know now. So in this lonely, because he's a big guy, he won't talk to the 2 guys that were accompanying him, okay? Because he's a big guy. But Jesus, now we know, sent, because either now or never, Saul had to change. Because he was prepared, he was the chosen vase to spread Christianity. And he was going to the wrong direction. He was persecuting the Christians. So the event of the martyrdom of Steve, it had a good part because that somehow shook him. Because this guy knew the Moses law as well as he did. Knew Greek, he was an educated guy, and could back and forth argue. And so he was humiliated by this guy. So he wanted to kill and killed. But of course, the loss of Abigail, in this trip, he started to, and we know that Jesus sent Stephen and Abigail to be close to him. So he started to remember all the events that happened. I don't know if I have here written, or I should. Yeah. Let me see the page. You can read, but. Well, let me read here. So he could not understand what was going on with him while he was going towards Damascus. He says, he himself could not explain what was happening. His memories were reaching back to the time of his early childhood. His entire industrious past appeared clearly in that introspective examination. Among all the familiar figures, the memory of Stephen and Abigail stood out the most, as if urging him to question himself even further. So those two spirits were together, would stick to him, you know. Why had these two siblings from Corinth acquired such a prominence amid all the problems of his inner self? Why had he waited for Abigail along all the path of his youth for the ideal of a pure life? He waited for a woman like Abigail to lose the way he lost. Why is that? He remembered his most noteworthy friends, but in none of them did he find moral qualities like those of that young preacher of the way. Stephen was with Peter in this house of the way, who had challenged his political, religious authority right there in front of all Jerusalem. Imagine, what a humiliation. He was to be the high rabbi in that temple, disdaining humiliation and death, only to die thereafter, blessing souls, iniquitous and implacable disease. So Stephen died blessing Saul. He said he didn't have any bad feelings. And Saul could not understand how these followers of Christ could be like this, you know, be so accepting and forgiving. What power had brought them together in the labyrinths of the world in such a way that his heart would never forget them? Why this was stuck with him? So he was poking this horse, but you know, his mind. And all of a sudden, however, as he was barely awakened from these disturbing thoughts, he finds himself enveloped by this light different than that of the sun. It was, look, there is desert, sun is really strong. But the confusion he sensed throws him off balance, and he falls helplessly from his mount onto the hot sand. His vision seemed to have extended to infinite. Imagine, can you believe now you see the whole universe almost? It goes. Another light bathed his dazzled by eyes, and on the path which the rain atmosphere has unveiled to him, he sees a figure of a man of majestic beauty. This is Emmanuel describing Jesus, giving the impression that he's coming down out the heaven to meet him. His robe is made of luminous points of light. His hair touches his shoulders in a Nazarene fashion. His eyes, majestic eyes, full of sympathy and love, illuminate a grave but gentle face, hallowed with divine sorrow. So Jesus was feeling sorrow because that chosen vase was going to the wrong direction. Saul of Tarsus contemplates him in profound wonder, and it is then, with the intonation of an unforgettable voice, that the unknown figure makes himself heard. Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me? Saul asked in a trembling and fearful, he was fearful. Who are you, Lord? Hallowed by a balsamic light and in a tone of inconceivable tenderness, the Lord respond, I'm Jesus. It was then the proud and unyielding doctor of the law bent to the ground in convulsive weeping. One could say that the passionate rabbi of Jerusalem had received a mortal blow, experienced in a moment the destruction of all the principles that had formed his spirit and guided his life until then. He was prepared to be the rabbi, the great authority in the place of Gamaliel. Right there before very his eyes, here now, was the magnanimous and misunderstood Christ. Okay. Then the apostle took, oh no, this is another part. Okay. So, I decided not to describe because Emmanuel describes much better this encounter. So that changed completely. He got blind, and he's alone in a small inn, and he has to wait for Ananias to come. And Ananias said to Jesus, are you sure you want me to go there and restore the sight of that man that was coming to get me? What is that? He says, yes, you go there. And then he goes there 3 days later, and he enters and he says, who is this? I'm Ananias. And then he starts to weep and he says, what happened to you in the gate of Damascus is true, it happened. So Ananias talked to Jesus, or Jesus talked directly to Ananias and described the event. That is true. It happened to you. So Ananias also gave the first writings of that he had in hand about the life, the gospel of Matthew. So in the end of the life of Paul, I want really to reach partially that state. Paul, after suffering all for 30 years, he was beaten, he was stoned for many different reasons, either because he was Christian preacher or because someone said, well, you are delusion, how to say, a young woman started to be in love with him, and then they decided to say that he was trying to change her mind, whatever, you know, like. So in the end, when the last time he said goodbye to the people of Palestine, where he was supposed to be judged there, trial, he said, no, but I want to be tried. I want to be judged by the Romans, by the, how to say, the king. I don't want to be by you guys from the religious part, religious authority. Oh yeah, you want to go back to Rome? So you go to Rome, where Nero was there. So he was saying goodbye, and this is what he says to Luke. Luke is this is the physician that accompanied Paul the whole time. And he got all the information from Paul. That's why the Gospel of Luke is actually all the experience and the writing of Paul. Because Luke never met Jesus, but he was, how to say, commanded to write the Gospel of Paul. So he says, so the physician, he was going jail, so the centurion was there to assure he was, and then in the holy silence, sprinkled with tears and prayers, hundreds of people watched the ship maneuver for departure. So he was going back to Rome. As it sailed, slowing down away, Paul and his companions contemplated Caesarea, with tears in their eyes. The silent crowd of those who were left weeping waved from the shore gradually faded away in the distance. Joyful and grateful, Paul of Tarsus rested his eyes on the field of his bitter struggles, meditating of his many years of offenses and necessary expiation. So he started to say, what bad things I have done. He remembered his childhood, the dreams of his youth that never came to be concrete, the troubles of his early adulthood, and his worthy endeavor for Christ, feeling that he was leaving Palestine forever. He was engrossed in lofty thoughts when Luke approached, nodding towards the friends who were continuing to kneel at the distance. Luke said softly, "Few events in this world have moved me as much as this one. I will record in my notes how you were loved by all who received from your fraternal hands the blessing of Jesus." So that was a good thing. But see what he responded. Paul seemed to ponder those words deeply and emphasize, "No, Luke, do not write about my virtues that I do not possess. If you love me, you must not expose my name to erroneous judgment. You must speak instead of the persecution I carried out against the followers of the Holy Gospel, of the grace of the Master shed on me at the gates of Damascus, so that the most hardened persons do not despair of salvation, but await his mercy at the right moment." Because we all make mistakes, right? "You shall recall the battles we have fought since the first moments due to impositions of Pharisaism and the hypocrisies of our time. You shall comment on the obstacles we have overcome, the painful humiliations and the countless difficulties, so that future disciples do not expect the redemption of their spirits through the false repose of the world, trusting in the incomprehensible favor of the gods." So don't wait for favors. We have to work. "But through hard work and blessed sacrifice for the betterment of themselves. You shall speak of our encounters with powerful and learned men, of our work with the unfortunate, so that the followers of the gospel in the future do not fear the most difficult and trying situations, aware that the messenger of the Master will always watch over them when they become true instruments of fraternity and love along the pathway that unfolds for the evolution of humankind. If we could finish this existence, I don't know. So that is the Jesus that I wish to pass. This kind, loving, the most loving messenger of God. Thank you. Sorry for the too long time.
Thank you, Yasco. And it's always an amazing moment when we get ourselves close to not the man on the cross, but as Yasco brought to us, what Spiritism brings to us, not the reminding ourselves of the beauty of the physical body, of all those things, as sometimes we get painted by the descriptions, the churches, and we're not here throwing stones or anything like that. We're just really trying to emphasize the beauty of the teachings that we get. And Yasco really brought this beautiful parts of this book. If you ever read Paul and Stephen, you'll be able to see that, or you'll be able to feel everything that there is to be felt. Anger, joy, whatever feeling that may come to mind, you will feel it, you will experience it, because Emmanuel brings it so well. And the characters as well exemplify. At the end, the message is not the message is not about Paul and Stephen, but really the teachings that, as some of us like to call, the Master left us. So well put, well brought to all of us to get closer, right? Because sometimes I have this feeling as well, even with my children, of how do we get closer to Jesus? And by looking at a picture, by looking at a statue, whatever it is, it really doesn't. But through the feelings, right? Through the teachings, through the moral laws that he was able to exemplify so well. So thank you for that, Yasco. We would like to open for a couple minutes for questions or comments that is connected with this beautiful message. So then we can go into our visualization. Kirsten, and then I'll go to Paula. Paula first.
Thank you. That was excellent.
Thank you.
I sometimes think it's better to hear Jesus' story from someone who was not raised in the religion, because I now see it with fresh eyes. Thank you. I'm curious about, now that you have come to this understanding of the story of Jesus, how you view the violence connected to his story, because originally your grandfather was protecting you from the crucifixion story, and you have gone through this whole journey in presenting the story. I thought at one point you said it was necessary,
Yeah.
so that these people would truly believe, but there really is a lot of violence, and all of his followers wound up being martyred. So I just thought, could you comment on that part a little more?
Yeah, the crucifixion, although it looked terrible, was the way it happened that time. It was nothing unusual. The unusual thing was that why it happened to such a nice person that they did not have anything against, anything. Even Pontius Pilate, he didn't know how to do that. The doctors of the law, they had the reason, because they didn't want the Christianity to replace there. And they had already all set everything, the authority, the way they would control the people, even though the people were slaves, but they have a special treatment from the Romans or whoever in that moment. They had hard times in other slavery, Babylonian, from Alexander, but I think what this violence, I think, is the human nature, in my opinion. It got this, how to say, disturbed, how to say, deturpado? Huh? Distorted. It got distorted throughout the centuries, all for economical gain and power. They want mostly, the church wanted riches from all countries that they invaded in order to make this rich church. So for that, they didn't mind, they had to believe, I don't know what kind of brainwash they had, in order to believe, that is not difficult probably, that they were doing the right thing. Just showed the cross and enslaved them, killed them, stoned them. Either you convert or not. That happens everywhere, including in Japan. They had to worship like they worship in Rome in the cemetery. So I think this is human being wanted to have gain from this slavery, to conquer that land and had all the gold, etc., etc. So, and now comes the TV, the shows. Why they show this violence? I know the war we explained, they had the correct agenda for that, but you know, I think it's part of the nature. We need blood, 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 you know, so it's portrayed always this negative, violent thing. Saturday of Hallelujah in Brazil, you make a doll size of a man and burn in public. I don't know here if you do the same, but in Brazil it's common, mainly in the small cities, countryside. You used to burn, burning Judas because he betrayed. And we think, you know, and my grandmother used to, look, my grandmother, poor grandmother, he used to say on a Good Friday, she used to say to me as a child, you better be careful tonight. Because from tonight until Sunday, you don't have God. They don't have God. So they're going to make all the bad things because they think God is not watching them. Because Jesus died. Can you believe this? She used to say this to be careful. So, but the crucifixion, he knew that he would be dragged by this event. Because look how he was, this revolutionary man doing everything that they hated, he was doing. Saying, you guys are hypocrites, you guys are, of course they had to do something with him. They didn't want this prophet, you know. So I think it was predictable that he would go to crucifixion. But what is the good part, if there is good part for that, is this impact. Because the disciples had to have something so strong, so painful about their beloved. It's not any stranger. They lived with that person for 3 years. So Jesus had to be sure that would be imprinted in their first disciples, that they would be willing to do exactly what he did. And they did. They thought being a martyr was some honorific, you know, title. He would go, they would go. And all of them except for John, they died as a martyr. And they were happy to do that. They were willing to do that because in part they would kind of decrease their pain of seeing such a perfect being that they are not. They knew they were not. But the perfect being that went so unjustly to suffer, oh, they should also do more. That's why Peter wants to be crucified, or I don't know if James, upside down, because he said, I don't deserve to be crucified in the same way as Jesus did, because he was was Peter. I'm not. I don't deserve even that type of. So I feel, and with the resurrection, you know, when you are suffering with pain and comes this relieving balm, you say, oh my God, this is good, isn't it? Yeah. Refreshing air, refreshing water when you're thirsty. I think it, in contrast, makes this impact in our brain, I think.
Yasco, kind of echoing what Paula was saying, this was an excellent presentation on Christ, and his, not only historical, but some other facts as well was excellent. Especially, as Paula said, someone coming from a background who didn't grow up knowing who Christ was. Yeah, I thought it was a beautiful depiction, especially for this weekend and any day, really. What was your, and something similar, my question is similar to Paula's in the sense that I'm curious to know, as you grew to know Christ, what was that like for you, coming from a background where it was almost like negated, denied, or disliked, or even hated, perhaps?
Well, that I have to thank the Spiritists, because the other Christian religion, it won't do this to me. It didn't. because this ritual is so out of logic, some of them. And for me, that I have this head, it won't go, you know. So, so the Spiritists, by bringing this the Jesus that appeared 2,000 years ago, how makes sense. If he came to talk about love, has to be seen like Buddha was seen as a peaceful figure. If he wants to say about peace, he cannot be covering blood. So it makes more sense now, this Jesus, the educator, this guy that is there beautiful in that lake, talking about love with authority, but about all the inclusiveness. So that I think, and for a long time, even now, for me it's difficult to pray for using the name Jesus. I may pray for my guardian angel, God. It's not easy to say God, Jesus. And then I remember 2 days ago, I heard one talk about of Alberto Almeida, which is the psychiatrist, and he does this memory backwards, hypnosis, and he says, it came a person, a Jewish girl, young lady, 30s, and she came because she was a medium. She knew she was a very strong medium. But she was in conflict because the Judaism condemned the invocation of spirits. And she could not do that, but the things would appear. So she thought she was in some crazy, sinful state. It took 3 years of therapy for her to start to say the word Jesus. I said, oh my God, I'm not alone. I'm not alone. There are people that cannot talk about his name. She could not. He gave Paul Stephen, I think, for her to read the first chapter, which is the Jewish people that is enslaved and the guy burned everything. She stopped. She could not do it. She couldn't go further because they knew that the thing was painful for them. And then 3 years of therapy in order for her to start to embrace this figure of Jesus. So it is tough in the way when the things develop during this 2,000 years. So bad things were done, you know. So, yeah, Abby, I think he wants you to.
Final question or comment.
I'm just repeating what Kirsten and Paula said. Thank you so much, and especially the way that you told the story felt like I was watching a play. How you
I may be a frustrated actress.
Maybe, but you did an amazing job. And so sitting here, listening to all the details, what came to mind was, here you had such a pure spirit. And now, if you look in modern times, what happens now in the Middle East, where he lived at that time, now in modern day, how in certain areas it's highly regarded if you are a martyr in current times. So just thought, you know what, look at this. He was such a pure spirit, and look what's been happening in that area for many years. I couldn't help
Yeah,
but...
I think the difference is that he did not want it to be a martyr. He just let the story, the time, the culture of the time, and let the free will of the man to do what they want. He won't use any of his power. The ones of today know the excuse that they will have something beautiful in heaven, I don't know how many virgins or whatever, they can do this to other people, like to clean. So it's another version of the Christians did. The Christians also tried to clean up during the Inquisition the ones that were not Christian. Goes the Jewish, goes the Muslim out. It's a cleansing system. With, of course, the excuse is that. But it's not the only one. They want all the good thing, all the richness that they had, and get to them, to rob. So I think humankind may use whatever excuse, but in the end is a hidden motive for me. It's a personal, they say, well, yeah, the scripture says so, I'm okay. So they twist. They twist. It's written there, but they twist. And it cannot be okay if it's causing a harm. That is not their rationale, because they don't want to be a good person. That's not their motive. They want to have a power over other tribes or whatever. That's always in humankind, I think. Yeah.
Thank you, Yasco. Thank you. Once more, a beautiful moment
Thank
for
you.
all of us to reflect and to think about it. We would like to transition to the next part of this evening. The invitation is for us to vibrate on the message.